Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn here with a wiring guide for Lian Unifan TL, LCD and standard fans. In this video I'm going to show you all the different wiring logic, how to connect these fans up to your system, the things you need to know and the things you need to be aware of before setting them up. I'm going to talk to you about the standard fans and the LCD fans, which I'm going to cover in more depth later on, including tips on how to set them up in L-Connect as well at the end of the video, and how to tweak the display and the fan speed and the RGB lighting and more. Goal of this video is to talk through the important things you need to know, because there's a lot of complexities to these fans and the way they're set up, and even before you purchase. So the fans are available in 120mm and 140mm variants, and you can also get reverse blade fans which have the fan blades facing the other way. You can see here on the left the reverse blade versus the standard setup. The idea of these fans is they're set so that they can be used as intake fans on the bottom of your case and the side, and this then allows you to put them in a way where you can still see the fan blades and not the back of the fans, so you can get good cooling performance while also having a good aesthetic in your case and in your build. Now they do sacrifice some performance, but they do look really nice. So with that in mind, you can also get both the triple packs of 120mm fans and both the LCDs and the standards and reverse blades of both as well. So there's a lot of options there, and you can get 140mm variants too, but only in single packs. The triple pack comes with this controller, which is essential, so you need at least one triple pack for your system. It's worth bearing that in mind. I'm going to start with a single fan so that you can see the setup and wiring logic of that, and then expand into all the others. Now a single fan comes with two cables that you can see here, and a little locking mechanism that I'll get to in a second. This is the standard fan with a standard orientation, so the back of it will pull air through into your case. That's an intake fan as standard, and as I said, you get two cables included in here, one that connects to the controller and the other one that connects either to another fan or another group of fans. Essentially it's a daisy chaining cable. Now the fan itself has a number of stickers on it that need to be removed from the mirrored areas, although I would leave that till nearer the end of your build so you don't end up with fingerprints all over them. And then you'll see pins on both sides, or connectors on both sides, because you can connect cables to both sides of this fan, and I'll show you why and how in a minute. And then there's some notches to lock the fans together as well. Obviously these mirrored areas are going to be some nice RGB lighting, and you'll also notice some other things that you can't see where the fan screws go initially, because there's actually some rubber washers covering those over quite nicely. More on that later as well. The standard fan cable that can be connected to the controller connects on either end, and you have pins on here which basically lock into place, and you can see the locking direction of that mechanism. So you'll notice if you look at the cable that essentially has both female and male connections, which gives you the choice to connect it on either side. So this cable with the black connector on the other end is the one that connects to the controller, which is why you need a triple pack. More on that in a minute. And then you have the other cable, which can also be connected to either end, which would then allow you to connect this fan to a group of other fans if you wanted to, or if you interlock it with other fans, then connect those fans to another group. And I'll show you what I mean in a second, because it can sound a bit complicated, and it can indeed get a bit complicated, but it can also be quite straightforward. If you're not going to use that port, you also have this little locking mechanism which sits over the top and covers that over and prevents any damage to the pins or any shorting, so it's important to use that if you're not going to be wiring at the other end. The clips on the ends of the fans can also be removed if you're not going to use them. These are the interlocking mechanisms that basically clip the Unifans together, and if you're not going to use them because this is a single fan, or maybe this fan is going on a radiator or at the end of a group that's going on the radiator, and you just want to take those off for a cleaner aesthetic or easier access to things, then you can do that. And it is nice because they basically just twist out, and then you have a much cleaner looking fan, which is obviously beneficial. These fans are well thought out in terms of the aesthetic, because obviously you're blanking off one end of the fan, and you can also change the direction of where the cable goes. So if you take a close look at the connecting cable, you'll see that there is a little notch in there where you can run that cable in. You'll also notice that it's clearly labeled as TL-LED fan connections. This will become important later on because this connector is different to those on the LCD fans, and you shouldn't try and mix those together. But as you can see, you can choose the direction the fan cable goes, which then means that you can not only choose the side it's connected, but also the direction the cable is run, so that you can really neaten things up in your case, hide those cables away, and make them point more in the direction you need to for cable management. This is obviously a really neat solution and goes to show the different thought process that Lian Li's gone to with the construction of these fans and the wiring logic of them. But what you will notice now is, now we've got these fan cables in there, there's no logical way to connect these straight to the motherboard, which is potentially problematic. Yes, you've got two connectors on there, but you don't have a system fan header connection. There's no 5V RGB connector, as there usually is with Lian Li's Unifans, so you do need a triple pack. So it's essential that you get a triple pack or buy a controller separately, although I would recommend getting a triple pack. Now this is a triple pack of the standard fans, which you'll see not only includes the 3 fans, but the controller. And the controller is able to control a number of different fans as well. Triple pack also has 3 cables instead of 2. The fan cable that connects to the controller, the fan cable for the daisy chaining, and then a SATA power connector, which I'll get to later on, which is also important, but may not be necessary depending on how you're building your case. With the 3 fans, you'll see that as standard in the triple pack, the locking mechanism is actually in place on those fans already, so you probably need to take that off and then just save it for use, and then lock those fans together with the 3 fans. And obviously just lining up the notches and slipping it into place, and that's the interlocking mechanism of the Unifans. It's traditional, that's what it's always been, and it is really convenient. On both sides, you'll also notice that you can't see the screw holes for the fans as well. Keep that in mind. If you're mounting on a radiator, you actually need to remove a lot of rubber covers in order to install these as well. So that's the triple pack setup of the fans. Obviously 3 fans as 120mm is pretty logical for most cases, and then you'd be using those in one position in your case, and then you'd connect to this cable, which obviously connects from one end of the fans, either end, to your controller, and this then allows you to control all 3 fans, including both the lighting and the RGB from L-Connect, as I'll show you later on, and obviously also the speed of it and managing that. Now these can be used on a radiator as well if you want to, as another point. So I want to show you the standard wiring logic with the controller. So the controller has 4 connectivity ports on it, and you can have up to 4 groups obviously of fans on there, with 4 fans per group, or in a minute I'll show you can actually put 10 fans on a single port. But if you've got one triple pack and you want to connect them up in the most simple way, then that cable then just connects up to one of the ports on there, and that's that connection as standard. That seems really straightforward and easy. And if you throw in more, you can apply the same logic as well, as we'll show you in a second. The controller, however, has multiple connections on it. You've got PCIe power connector, USB, system fan header, and 5V RGB connections. Now, the PCIe power connector is the same one that you'd use for your graphics card, the usual 8-pin connector that you get with your power supply unit that you'd connect to a standard graphics card, can be split generally, and just has a 6-pin power connector. This is an interesting change from Lian Li's previous controllers, which use SATA power instead, but now you need a PCIe power connector on this controller. So bear that in mind, because it might be problematic in some systems. Make sure you've got this cable free and that you can actually use it on this controller. So you'll need to then plug that in. Now we have the other connections, USB, 5V RGB, and system fan header. As a minimum, you want the USB connection so that you can control the fans via L-Connect. The 5V RGB header and system fan connections are for controlling and syncing the RGB lighting with your motherboard software. So if you have MSI Mystic Light, for example, you can control that with there, and then the fan speed can be controlled from your BIOS or your motherboard software that way. But using the USB connection allows you to control it all via L-Connect, and it's the most simple way to do it. So the 5V and system fan header connections aren't essential and not necessary, but as a minimum you need PCIe power and the USB connection. Now, as well as having those 3 fans connected to a single port, you can also use that other cable that I showed you earlier on to connect another fan. So let's take the single fan that we had in the first bit of this video, and we can connect it to that group from the triple pack. You might have these fans on the top of your case as exhaust, and then this one at the rear as an exhaust fan, and you've now got a group of 4 fans connected to one port with a daisy chaining cable between them. That's a very simple setup, and it shows you how easy theoretically it is to wire up these cables and these fans. And it gives some flexibility, because if you have a larger case, we're using 4 120mm fans at the top of the case, for example, you can do that. So you can just clip those fans together, and now you've got a group of 4 fans on one port. So it is possible to do that. Now you can actually expand the number of fans on there as well, and you can have a lot more than that if you're using the daisy chain cable. You can have up to 10 fans on a single port by just using daisy chain cables between them, and I'll get to that in a second. But more simply, you may want one group connected with that one connector, and then another fan connected with the standard connector, and then another group connected, and then obviously having multiple groups into one controller. But it does give you flexibility on how you're running the cables and connecting them up in your case, because it means that you can obviously use those daisy chain cables to keep things a bit neater, to have extra fans in the system without having extra controllers potentially. So you can have up to 16 fans is the claim on there, or 10 fans per port. This logic will obviously also apply to the 140mm versions as well. Now for reverse blade fans, the logic is the same, and you can use the same controller, and the contents of the single packs are the same as well. So basically it's the same sort of thing. You don't need to overthink this. They just have different fan orientation, so you just need to worry about where you're putting them in your case, as I showed earlier on. These are now intake fans if you put them on the bottom of your case, but the wiring is the same. So you just connect them up in the same sort of way. You'd use the cable that connects the group into the fan controller. Now, although you could lock them together, I wouldn't interlock the reverse blade fans with the standard fans. That would be fairly illogical to do that. And I'd also keep them separate potentially in your daisy chain group if you're going to do that, but you can do the cables together as well, and I am going to do that for demonstration purposes in a second, because I wanted to show you how you can connect loads of fans to a single group. So the other thing is that the L-Connect software can recognize the difference between the 140 and 120mm fans and the LCD ones, so you can use the same controller for multiple different sorts of fans, big and small, LCD and not. But as I said, you can daisy chain the fans together. So if you want to, you can put up to 10 fans on a single connection by just running these daisy chain cables from one group to the next. So this is pretty interesting, but the complexity of it does come in with the amount of power draw that it requires. Because if you do connect up to 10 fans and then put them on a single port, that then means that these fans are using a lot of power that's coming from the controller. So Lian Li then recommends that you need to use an additional cable that's included with the triple pack that I showed earlier on, which is the SATA power connection. So this connects to the far end of the group that's been daisy chained, and it connects in the same sort of port that it would usually use for the other connections. But what this requires is then you need to connect that up to the power supply unit. So the SATA ports, which is the same ones you'd use for your SSDs, hard disk drives, and maybe other fan controllers. So this standard cable with that L-shaped connector on it that connects up to the SATA port on your PSU. And what you do there is you're connecting up the power directly to the fans. This ensures that you can get the most amount of lighting for your fans and the power that they need in a long chain of fans that are connected up together like that. So especially if you're using white, they say that you should definitely use this connector. So white lighting will require more power draw, so you want to have this connector on the other end. So fairly complicated there. Now the LCD fans, and these are slightly different. Now you will notice that the triple pack of these LCD fans comes with a controller as well, so you do get a controller there, but it's the same controller, so you can use the same controller from either of the triple packs to control the fans. And these are the reverse blade LCD fans, and again you can get these in standard orientation instead, so there are options with what you do there. And you will notice some other things about them. As I said, you can only connect the fans on one end, so the cabling is different, and also the center of the fan is a bit larger because of that display on there, which we can set up in L-Connect later on and get the controls of that. You'll notice if you look at the pack contents, there's a slight difference here. You don't get as many cables, and that's because you don't have the daisy chain cable, because you're not meant to daisy chain these fans into other groups. You can only connect 3 LCD fans together, and only 3 fans per channel on the controller. That's an important point. So you can't put 4 fans and you can't daisy chain these together, and you also shouldn't try and connect these LCD fans with the standard TL fans. Remember that, and also remember that the LCD connecting cable is different to the LED one. Take a close look at it, you'll see it has LCD marked on it. You'll also notice on the other side, if you flip it over, that it doesn't have the pins that the LED version does. If you try and use the wrong cable, you could cause problems with the fan, so don't try. And also just look closely at these before you try and install it so you don't do any damage to it. Now, the fan cable will only connect on one end, as you can see. On the LCD one, you have pins that are jutting out there that you then need to connect this cable to. But again, you can run the cable in either direction on that fan, so you can connect it up. Now, interesting point of note is that you can potentially have 7 LCD fans in your system. So 3 fans on one port, 3 fans on another port, and then another fan on another port, and then up to 10 of the other fans on a single port daisy chain together, as I showed you earlier on. So you can put loads of these fans in there, although I haven't been able to experiment with that to test how it works. But just bear in mind that you can't daisy chain them together. You need to keep them on separate ports. So in this instance here, you can see 2 different groups of the LCD fans run into the controller on those 2 connections. The other thing I'd recommend is actually trying to set this up outside the case, or maybe not installing the LCD fans into the case before you've tested them. As you've seen there, one of those fans wasn't working. Its display wasn't working properly, despite it spinning and other things. And Lian actually says if you do see this, you should shuffle the fans around in their group, moving one fan into the place of the other fans, which means you'd have to unscrew the fans in order to sort it out, which would be a pain. So something to keep in mind there if you do notice a problem with it. Now, with all these fans, you will need to remove the rubber washers so that you can access the screw holes. If you're mounting them on a radiator, you'll need to remove them from both sides, but you can use standard radiator screws and the screws that are included with the fans to install them in the case with relative ease. This is in the Lian Evo RGB, which I've done some videos on as well. I'll link to in the description. You can find out more on if you want to see. And the end result looks really nice, I think you'll agree. And they've got really good cooling, really good lighting, and obviously the benefit of the LCD display as well. So we'll get into how to set that up and more in a second. So once you've got everything installed and set up, download the latest version of LConnect and check for firmware updates under the settings section. From there, you can then obviously click into the TL fan utility and select the LCD fans, and then you can adjust through various different things. So obviously we can choose from pictures, sensors, PNGs, GIFs, and other things. You've got the option to change all that. I'll show you lighting and fan speed in a second, but obviously the LCD is pretty interesting, and you can adjust that. You can sync it all so they're all the same, or you can change them individually. So we can have one set for CPU temperature, one for GPU temperature, one for CPU load, for example. And you can also change both the style and orientation of the display as well. So you'll see there's an option down here to adjust the orientation. So if you notice it's squiffy, depending on where you put it in your case, you can just move these around and then that'll reposition it and adjust that. I have noticed that sometimes it resets on reboot, so you may need to play around with the settings in LConnect to fix that. Hopefully that will get updated in future software updates though. And you can then choose the style of it as well. So there's an option for style on the sensors where you can change the color of the text, the style of the text as well. So you can choose the style of the sensor, and then you can adjust the color of the text and the bars from the options on the right hand side there. So there's plenty of different options there. If you go into the quick sync lighting section, this is probably my favorite for the lighting effects. You can choose from various different lighting effects that you can apply to all. This will apply to all of the fans in your system, whether it's the standard fans or the LCD ones, and you can adjust the brightness or choose from various lighting effects in here. Now, this doesn't have as many options as if you individually do each of the groups of fans, but the quick lighting effect is the easiest. There's also the motherboard lighting sync option at the top, which you can turn on and off depending on whether you're using that sync fan for the 5V RGB connection that I mentioned earlier on. So bear that in mind. Now, also under the TL fan utility, you can go into each of the fans and adjust the lighting. Now, the lighting can be changed for the sides of the fans individually. So you can see that you can sync that, or you can change it individually. You can adjust the speed and brightness, and there's a lot more lighting effects in here, where that means individually go and check in each group. Under the device settings, in the settings, you'll find that you can see the fans that are on each port and each group in here, and it will show you the differences between them. So you'll notice the LCD ones stand out, for example. If you've installed some on your radiator, I'd make a note of which port they were on when you installed them, so that you can then control the fan speed for those separately, and the logic of how that works, and adjust it. So when you go into the fan speed section, you can go into each group and you can adjust between quiet, standard, high speed, full speed, and custom, where you can set your own custom fan curve. You can also apply a start stop, so they go 0 RPM, so they won't spin unless required. So that's an option. But you'll also notice, if you look closely above the graph, there's an option for the drop down on the CPU, so you can set it so you can change the fan speed according to the CPU temperature or GPU temperature, so you can customize this. Now this is useful if you do it on a group by group basis, because obviously you could apply your AIO fans, the ones that are on your all-in-one cooler, and in a particular group you could set them to adjust to the temp of a CPU, whereas the other ones could be adjusting based on your GPU temperatures, or you could just apply it based on just the CPU and set to whatever fan speed you want in that curve. I personally like using quiet though, because Lian, these fans are pretty clever at ramping up when they need to, and the experience of keeping it quiet is pleasant, but you do need to apply it across the board to make it work. And I found that I had to go into each of these individually in the groups and then set the logic for them, so it's a little bit fiddly. But again, you can motherboard sync if you prefer with a switch at the top. You've made it right to the end of the video, you brilliant legend you. If you've enjoyed it, click that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and drop me a comment down below if you've got any questions. If you really enjoyed it, consider joining the channel and see the benefits of doing so. Check out these other videos, you might well find them interesting or useful, and most importantly, have a great life.